As a pastor, I'm sometimes asked to perform a ceremony for couples wishing to renew their wedding vows. One time it was for a couple on the occasion of their 25th wedding anniversary. They said, when we first said our vows, in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, we had no idea what we were really saying. 25 years later, those words mean so much more to us. Another couple wanted to renew their vows after an especially tough season of pain and mutual hurt caused by each to the other. They said, we want to start over. Both couples, in front of family and friends, renewed their commitment to each other by saying, I do, all over again. This kind of ceremony reminds me of the people of Israel and their relationship with God shortly after they finished rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. We've been studying how a man named Nehemiah led one of the most impressive construction projects in biblical history. His aim was not just to rebuild a wall around the city, but to rebuild the hearts and the souls of those who would be living in the city. Last week we saw how Nehemiah called the people to lay down their tools and come to the city square. This was going to be a different kind of day. Nehemiah's friend, Ezra the priest, makes his way to a tall platform constructed just for this occasion, and he simply reads from the scriptures for hours. The people hang on every word. They are moved to the point of tears, and they enter into a time of humble confession. They confess their own sins and the sins of their ancestors. It's a massive reality check. They acknowledge the reality of God and the reality of their present condition. It's a time of brokenness and of beauty. At the end of this time of contrite confession, the scripture says, in view of all of this, we are making a binding agreement, putting it in writing, and our leaders, our Levites, and our priests are affixing their seals to it. Right? They're saying, in view of all that's true about our loving and merciful God, and in view of all that's true about our tendency to wander, we are making a binding agreement. And they're so serious about this, they put it in writing. The leaders make their commitment first. They sign the document just like the signers of the Declaration of Independence. They declare their commitment in a formal and public way. After the leaders commit, the rest of the people, men, women, and any children old enough to understand, all make a commitment. It says they bind themselves with a curse and an oath. What was the oath? To follow the law of God given through Moses, the servant of God, and to obey carefully all the commands, regulations, and decrees of the Lord our God. The people recommit to following God. The language in chapter 10 is covenantal, but this is not really a new covenant. It's a renewed commitment to following the old covenant. It's like a renewal of vows ceremony where the people say, I do, all over again to God. It's a commitment to be God's covenant people. God, we promise before you and these witnesses to be your loving and faithful people in plenty and in want, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health. In what kinds of ways are you ready to commit or recommit to be God's people? Are you ready to renew your vows? Nehemiah's leaders and people are wholeheartedly ready to make a commitment. But remember, they've been part of a long process. They've read the scriptures. They've done this honest reality check, acknowledging the truth about God and the truth about themselves. And now the natural next step is recommitment. You can read their specific commitments in chapter 10. And you will notice again that these are not necessarily new commitments, but a renewal of old commitments. And at the center of it is a renewed commitment to Sabbath keeping, to tithing, and to supporting the temple. These are very old practices. The idea of Sabbath goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1, and the temple was at one time the center of Jewish life. But the people had gotten lax. Slowly, over time, they drifted away from the command to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. They had drifted away from their support of the temple. Their list of commitments ends with the emphatic declaration, we will not neglect the house of our God. Maybe you're feeling a readiness to commit in similar ways to Sabbath keeping or church engagement or giving. Maybe you, like the returning exiles, have gotten lax on these things. Or maybe God's prompting you in other ways to recommit yourself to Him. but commitment is necessary for renewal. Notice that the commitment the people of Israel make is a communal commitment. Right? We Americans think very individualistically, but here we see a commitment that a group of people make together as a people, as a nation, as a family. And as you think about what kind of commitments you're ready to make or renew, think about your individual commitments. That's part of it. But maybe there's also a commitment that your family or your small group might make together. Maybe your family or your small group might make a commitment to serve together in your church or community, or to raise funds together for some kind of cause, or to pray together for a specific person or place, or to prayer walk together around your neighborhood. Maybe together you will decide we will be people of the book and renew a commitment to the scriptures. In both individual commitments and communal commitments, you will be able to support and encourage each other and even hold each other accountable. Right? When I make a commitment of any kind, whether it's to exercise or to share my faith with my neighbor, if I share my commitment with my group, and if I know my group is likely to ask me how it's going, I am much more likely to follow through. We prompt each other, not to produce guilt, but to produce growth. It's one of the reasons small groups are the best place to spur one another on toward love and good deeds, as the book of Hebrews says. It's safe to assume that every member of our group is at a different place in their relationship with God, but I want to encourage all of you, to the best of your ability, to each renew your marriage vows to God in ways that are appropriate for you. You've got to be honest with where you are and with the readiness of your heart, but you want to stretch a little bit. Vows are always daunting. I stood at the front of a church when I was 26 years old and promised to be Angie's loving and faithful husband as long as we both shall live. And 31 years later, we are both still living. That alone is an act of grace. I have not loved her perfectly. I have been prone at times to take her for granted. I haven't fulfilled my covenant promises completely, and that is why we need grace and mercy and renewal. God is the only perfect covenant keeper, and He is worthy of our highest commitment. But far more important than the vows that you make, are the vows that God makes. And God has promised to never leave you or forsake you. So this week, rejoice in that good news that God is the perfect covenant keeper. And think about what commitments you can make to that covenant God. See you next time.